All right, welcome back to the broadcast, and the gentlemen are here. I'll be asking them where the ladies are at, or is it that ladies do not really involve themselves so much so in this talk about wildlife? And let it be known that when we're talking about wildlife, then it goes beyond the animals, it goes to the level of the plants. Let's just talk about zoology as well as, is it botany? Yes, and that's basically what we'll be talking about this evening. And we all understand that it is Wildlife Day, under the banner of the United Nations. And so as we get to this conversation, we just want to bring it home and look at some of the things that actually would concern us. Today, we have opted to discuss the wildlife as well as human conflict and what will it take for us to put this to an end. Also appreciating the theme of the day that is focused so much so on connecting the people and the planet, equally as exploring digital innovation in wildlife conservation. You will agree with me that this conflict then will sit right at the heart of the theme this time around. I am delighted to have two gentlemen on set, one of them as well. We'll also be having another gentleman that will join us shortly, that is on Skype or via Skype. But then as we get to this, allow us to introduce the ones that we have on set already. And right next to me is Kip Olepolos. Kip Olepolos is the chairperson like Laikipia Conservancies Association. Thank you so much for creating time to be with us. And we also have Shuja Prince Harrison, who is the founder of Friends of Masai Mara and Mara Napa. Is it Napa or Napa Camp and Conservation Center? Gentlemen, asanteni sana kufika jioni hii leo as we get to this conversation. I know this is right at the heart. Perhaps before we even get to the conflict that sits at home, what would you make of this important day in terms of conservation of the wildlife? We'll begin with you, yes.
Again, my name is Kip Olepolos, LCA, Laikipia Conservancies Association, and Ilingwezi Community Conservancy. This day is super important in the world of wildlife conservation and people. I am a believer of a symbiotic relation between people and wildlife and nature. So it's the day we're telling the world they should join us. A lot of people really do not think that wildlife conservation is something important, but talk of the global warming, talk of climate change. For us to be able to mitigate or to handle all that, we've got to think about people and wildlife and as well as nature.
And I'm glad that you mentioned nature, because most of the times when we talk about wildlife, the assumption is that we're just looking at animals. We tend to forget the plants, we tend to forget that this is actually home. The plants are actually the ones that actually form a home for these animals. And so we'll also be talking about, just nature and beyond. But also we come to you, Shuja. What do you make of these important days, and especially if we're going to look at the umbrella of the strides that we've made in conservation of wildlife?
Well, thank you. My name is Prince. I'm a Shuja, and this is a very important day for the planet. ICT emphasizes on the importance and the balance that is brought about by the flora and fauna. And as you just mentioned, we can't speak of our wildlife without their home, and which is nature, the habitat, and all that. Therefore, this is a critical day that we most of the people don't take it seriously, don't know, and thank you for you guys highlighting and putting the importance of this day such that we are able to communicate to the rest of the world the insights. Because I believe what we are experiencing and all the challenges or that we are going through is related to how much change we bring to the wildlife, to the nature, to the habitat. So I think this is really critical, and we have to pass this message far and wide.
Well put. We keep talking about preserving the environment, but just how do you think the world is so committed towards preservation of wildlife, even as we celebrate and commemorate this day?
From my point of view, I don't think the world really a lot of people do not know about this. I come from Ilingwezi Community Conservancy, which allow me to tell you what Ilingwezi means. It means people of wildlife.
People of wildlife?
Yes.
Okay.
In Maasai, IL stands for people.
Okay.
Ngwezi means wildlife.
Okay.
We call ourselves people of wildlife because for us to be who we are, we know wildlife has to be there and people have to be there.
Right.
And we are pastoralists. We have our culture. But how many people, for example, what percentage of Kenyans are thinking in that way? Think of fauna and flora. How many people, if I went to the streets of Nairobi and stand and ask people what is the importance of bugs that we have, or flies, or hyenas, people do not know. It's our duty to make them know the importance that without the bugs, without the doodles, without the flies, without the hyena, they would not be enjoying the great atmosphere they're enjoying.
Okay. Yeah. I think it begins from this point, and perhaps thank you for bringing us to that level, because then if we're going to talk about, human-wildlife, conflict, perhaps we should begin by just asking ourselves what constitutes of this, because we could actually be blaming individuals that are not aware of what really the significance of this is. And so when we talk about human-wildlife conflict, what are some of the things that we need to highlight to get to understand it best?
Well, I think this is a topic, and always one of very critical topics that comes out due to how I will define that is human-wildlife conflict is a result of human-wildlife interaction. There's interactions that when the people and the wildlife interact, there either you find either positive results or negative. In the context where human interact with wildlife in the context of tourism, that there's a positive part of it, and there's when is the interaction between people in the context of fighting for resources, you find a negative interaction.
Right.
So when a negative interaction arises, that is affects people, the environment, and the wildlife. And due to now we focus more of why this negative is. And the reason why we try to pass this message is to reduce the negative to be so minimum and increase the positive. Because the positive brings about more resources, more space, more sharing of those resources. So in my definition, it's about how do we minimize the negative impact due to interaction. That brings us to why do we get the negative interaction?
Right.
It's because either we're fighting for space in terms of land, habitat where, for instance, elephants, maternity, the forest where they can be able to give birth, their home as well, and as well as the space for roaming for or flourishing for that coexistence. So that, for me, is the discussion is how do we make sure the interaction is resulting to positive impact rather to the negative.
And you pinpointed a very important thing, that this should be something that takes us to a collective point where then it concerns everybody. But then again, when we're talking about pastoralist communities that perhaps are the ones that, interact with these animals on a daily basis because of the resources that they share, then the people or the rest of the world then would want to ask, why should it be our business? Why would it be important for us to be part of this agenda, that would speak to preserving wildlife in this particular case?
Well, to react on that, think of why. The first question that would come or came into my mind is why are we talking about wildlife conflict? This thing has been there since time immemorial.
Right.
But we should be in discussion of how do we reverse some of the mistakes we did before. Because let me talk of my country. I'm a proud Kenyan. I'm a very proud Kenyan. But looking at what LCA is all about, it's all about connectivity, connecting land. And even though we're talking, that's our goal, we have challenges because when the demarcation or land was subdivided a long time ago, those who are alive then and who are planning all this didn't consider the wildlife movement corridors. I can give you, I don't know how conversant you are with the country, but you've got Aberdares, for example, in Mount Kenya, and Amara. I bet animals used to roam from Ethiopia all the way to Tanzania. Now, those corridors have been blocked. It's our duty today, if we want to get control of human-wildlife conflict, we need to open those corridors. And we need to bring everybody on board without using force, educate people, and make people benefit out of wildlife and nature for them to understand why we need to put resources towards opening the corridors and connectivity.
One that would want to ask, how do we strike a balance in a world that is rapidly changing, and therefore there's need for that acceptance that indeed we're in that space where things are changing, and we are in that space where it is not like what it was like, back then. But then again, we have to soldier on, we have to move on. So how do we strike that balance? Allow us to loop in Tom Sylvester, who's the CEO of Loisaba Conservancy, who joins us via Skype. Tom, if you can hear me, good evening.
Good evening to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sparing some time for us. It's an honor to have you. And we highlight what would be, of course, of human as well as wildlife conflicts, but of importance just looking at the underlying factors that would contribute to this conflict. Hence my question this evening. It's a world that is moving and turning and changing rapidly. How do we strike a balance?
So I think one of the critical things here, and my colleagues have very eloquently outlined it, is the idea that when we talk about wildlife conservation or protection of wildlife, we need to think about it as in the terms of protecting it for people rather than from people. I mean, that may be pretty simplistic, but at the end of the day, we all need to understand that we're part of the planet, we're part of nature, and that we must strive to create a situation where it ceases to be human-wildlife conflict, but it's human-wildlife coexistence. And I think that's easy in some circumstances. I think people have been coexisting with wildlife for centuries, particularly in the pastoralist context. And then you have to think about the benefits to those people who do live with wildlife and how that's distributed, how they're created. And I think Prince was quite correct about moving to the positive, negative. But then we have huge challenges with things where, wildlife and agriculture, intensive agriculture, for instance, is very difficult to share the same space. So then we get into the situation of spatial planning and letting science lead us. And as Kip so eloquently put, we need to think about wildlife corridors and movement and connectivity. And I think that's part of the problem is we've had haphazard development, haphazard planning, linear development along roads and things like that have cut corridors and have put people into wildlife space and vice versa. And I think those are some of the challenges that we need to think about. So the formation of conservation or conservancies in Kenya has been a fantastic achievement. Kenya leads the world in community conservation, where people can actually learn to coexist with wildlife and benefit from that wildlife. And I think these are some of the important things to get involved in.
Nice. And we are talking about the World Wildlife Day. Then one would want to ask, just how are the conflicts unique to the different countries that perhaps we would speak to? I know we are, narrowing down to Kenya, but we also understand that perhaps this is a global concern, and therefore there is need for synchrony across, if at all we're going to address the menace that we have acknowledged has been there since time immemorial. So what are some of the unique factors to these different countries, and how do we attain some element of synchrony if we're going to win the fight across?
I think that's a great question. So I think what we're beginning to understand more and more is that if we continue to degrade our planet, continue to put ourselves in a negative equity position by destroying biodiversity, global warming is apparent today. It's an existential threat to us as a species. And I think it's so important to bring it front and center to the table that actually protecting biodiversity, enhancing biodiversity, making sure we plan correctly around development and so forth becomes not just something that's a benefit to the wealthy West or the benefit to people who can afford to see this wildlife, but it's actually an existential threat that if we destroy it, then we destroy ourselves. And I think this is something that is important to get built up in awareness. And it's very difficult when you are unsure about where your next meal is coming from. Do you need to worry about an elephant or so forth? So it's very challenging. And I think the investment in around awareness is critically important. And then being able to draw the line between where the benefit is and where the cost is and how you analyze the two together.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll be coming back to you for that. I'm sure the gentlemen have heard you. But even as we perhaps speak to what it is that Tom says, it is important for us to acknowledge, and I know we have highlighted some of the concerns that would bring this conflict, of course, human population growth that cannot be denied, and of course encroachment into wildlife space, the habitats, climate change. We have also had unsustainable land practices, or land use and practices across, and these are things that we might want to limit, but then again, the pressures of life would not allow for us to limit. It is important then that there's that sensitization, there's that understanding that, the locals or perhaps the people who are enjoying these spaces or these habitats for animals are made to understand. So what are some of the concerns, the consequences to this problems or perhaps to human-wildlife conflict that these people need to understand so that they come up with mechanisms that would help address the problems?
Thank you for the question. And I bet my colleagues will contribute to this, but how I look at it is we need to know that people lived with wildlife since time immemorial.
Okay.
And they've got a culture. And it's wrong for me to go and tell people, that you need to change your lifestyle and live this way. And before I go there, I think the challenge is, let's look at the pastoralist communities. They never had those small plot land ownership with fences and limits and, you shouldn't cross here and you shouldn't go that way. They had their own mechanism of controlling the pasture. It was enough for them for their livelihood, that is livestock, as well as wildlife. But because the new culture has come in, people own pieces of land and put the boundaries, that contributes a lot into wildlife conservation, into human-wildlife conflict. I think it's time to reverse that by opening corridors. And again, when we brought, or whoever who brought education, fantastic, it's a good thing, but he forgot to put the link between wildlife conservation, nature, and the culture, as well as education. So
I think we're getting to the point. The program is called To the Point, and now we're getting to the point. And perhaps just to loop in Shujaa here, allow me to call you Shujaa for obvious reasons. You have heard what it is that Senior is saying here. Just how realistic is this in a world, again, that is moving very fast?
Well, thank you so much. And as I was listening to my colleague here, first I was thinking about why do we call it conflict, human-wildlife conflict?
Yeah.
And to us, is a definition that we take as conflict. And if their wildlife could be able to speak, probably in their own word, it could be survival. Because we are pushing for this, we are trying to run for resources, and our consequences, that is as humans, which is population growth, is growing our education system, our land practices, all these things, we are moving so fast, forgetting the very foundation and connection we have with nature.
Yeah.
We tend to run so fast and leaving this behind, and all these challenges come in, and now is the time we're running back and say, hey, well, we forgot this, and this and this. And on this point of education, we have schools, we have all levels of schools, from primary, but you find so many of those levels, conservation is not anything to go by.
Yeah.
And you find the population is increasing tenfold, but it's increasing at a rate also that is forgetting the conservation and the connection with nature. So therefore, what is left from my background as the Maasai and all that is the stories that link to this is how these things are done.
Yeah.
There is nothing that says this is how things are done or this is how things will be done. So there's a gap there where you find many organizations try to go beyond their means to try to define and find how we can bring this topic to be a household kind of discussion, such that it is something that we as Kenyans or people of the world are able to associate and be able to be concerned when we see something. Just one point is, everyone is breathing oxygen in the planet. Not 1 minute do we ever think about how much of oxygen you're using, where is it coming from, will it end, or something like that. And when you look back, it is the same nature and that is supplying all these endless resources.
Right.
But we are not putting measures into place to look at that. Therefore, our consequences as humans is coming back to harm the same people.
Yeah.
And the only part we are coming to wake up is when we talk of capitalism. How do we benefit?
Wow.
We bring a definition, how do we benefit? How do I get money from this wildlife? How do we get money from the forest? That is what triggers you to be able to look for something that is so critical for your survival.
Very important factors that are coming out of this conversation, and we'll come and look at the socioeconomic, factors that, are under this, but of importance, the impact of the same on socioeconomic, growth as a people and for, of course, for the country. But what then I would want to ask is, I look at your entity is more of a conservation center. I look at Kip Olopolo's entity. He's a chairperson of a Conservancies Association, that is Kenya. I like Kip, We also look at Tom Sylvester, Loisaba Conservancy. And then we want to ask ourselves, just how much do these entities, get into that space of getting the communities to understand, that education aspect. If at all as a country we are not getting it, what are we doing with all these associations that are around to address the same? I'll ask you to take a short break, gentlemen, and then we come back to that very crucial question.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nikuwe na Nisani kama 10 na pia nikuwe menua minibus. Minibus niko niwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee, soma Biblia ama ingia kwa washroom ujisugue mpaka nimetoa hivi.
I don't know whether any of my children would want to get into the political field. Sijajua bado.
Kila Alhamisi saa 1:30 kuendelea.
Join us on a journey through the concrete jungles and rising skylines, where every beam, every nail tells a story of progress and vision.
In every aspect of life, you have to look at several dynamics.
From groundbreaking,
Nowadays with the tech, you can check on different websites or you check online and you can see some inspiration. So at least that one would be a direction already. I'll know like what kind of style you're going for.
to finishing touches, witness the dedication of the hard-working teams who bring these ambitious dreams to reality. The Realtor, Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
And of course, as the world comes together to celebrate the World Wildlife Day, it's important that we at home as well dedicate the conversations that we have to this. And therefore, we have narrowed it down to human-wildlife conflict right here in the country and perhaps beyond. And we just get to establish or perhaps speaks to some of the things that would be incorporated so that we reduce these conflicts. With me, Shujaa Prince Harrison Taga, as well as Keep Olepolos, and joining us virtually, Tom Sylvester. I'm told that we will go back to Tom shortly, but back to the gentlemen. If we're going to talk about, Napa Camp and Conservation Center, talk about like Kipia Conservancies Association, and then talk about Loisaba Conservancy, I mean, what are these entities doing towards making sure that this education that we are yearning for and we ask for, is well, disseminated to the locals that stay in these areas where there's so much wildlife, and in this case, I'm talking about the animals, forests as well as, just nature and these habitats.
Thank you. If I may talk of Laikipia.
Yeah.
Laikipia Conservancies Association has community conservancies as well as private conservancies working together. I'm proud to say I'm a founder of it, and the whole idea was how can we all come and sit around the table as the conservation community instead of saying community and private. We are all doing the same thing pretty much, which is conservation. So through LCA, we've been able to put everybody around the table, and we talk about our strengths and weaknesses together and how to go forward. And what we're doing is we are, as far as communities are concerned, we are doing our level best to educate people and to trigger the fruits of conservation back to the community, plow the money back. I can give an example of Ilingwezi Community Conservancy, where our members, we own a piece of land as a community. I am the custodian of the title deed, and we are about 5,000 people. We've set aside about 75% of our land into wildlife conservation, and that is the backbone of our income generating project as far as wildlife conservation is. We have a lodge that high-end people come, including Prince William and other people. And the money that we get from that and donors and carbon credit money and all that is put together and it's plowed back into community conservation projects. With that, then the community gets, I don't want to say land, because these people were doing wildlife conservation
from way back.
What they never did was to make a living out of it. But now, economically, we are making a living out of it.
Okay.
We've got women in leadership and women in programs and youth, elders, everyone is benefiting. I can give, like this year we've given out this term an equivalent of about, in Kenya shillings, probably 8 million shillings to education, to sponsor kids or to pay school bursaries, build clinics, build high schools through wildlife conservation. So people see the benefit, not to mention the jobs. All these conservancies in Laikipia put together, we have job opportunities. We hire what we call local, and we've got local. So local is anybody else, be it a Mzungu from the UK, an expertise on something that we don't have, but the local gets the first priority. So if my son is working in a private conservancy, before the poacher goes in and hunt a rhino in there, I will tell the conservancy because I know my son will be in the battle.
Okay.
So with that, that's what I call the symbiotic relation between people and wildlife. Direct benefit.
Okay. I'll come back to what it is that you had mentioned earlier on in relation to the territorial boundaries that are set and all that, and perhaps just ask for you to highlight that some more to make us understand, what exactly you are referring to some more, because then if you're going to set up some of these entities like schools and all that would benefit a community, how do you do that ably without considering boundaries, without considering some of these things that you highlight? But before you respond to that, I think it's also noble that as well Prince tells us what he makes of the socio-economic impact as to this. And when we're talking about the numerous conservancies, just what they are doing towards making sure that, yes, the community is enlightened as to how they can minimize the conflict.
Well, thank you so much. I being an engineer by profession, but I have a passion for conservation, and has always been a dream. How can I help my community to preserve the treasure and the heritage they have? Well, the Maasai have been in conservation ever time immemorial. And it's through their action and their decision they made before that we're able now to be discussing about conservation. Now the world has changed, and so we must change to be able to coexist. I founded Friends of Masai Mara as a non-profit to bring together all the friends, regardless where are you from, as long as you love the Mara. How do you contribute in one way or the other to preserve this jewel we have? So the challenge I saw was first, what are these gaps that we have? What are the challenges that we have? What are others doing? And what is this gap that I can? Mine, I saw there is a big gap in information. How would we have the right information? How would we own the narrative? How would we have a continuity between our forefathers, ourselves, and also make sure the future is, we shape the future that is tomorrow for the next generation. So I came up with a concept of sustainability, where we have a non-profit here. We have the wildlife around us. We have other entities that are preserving land as conservancies. How would we have an education center? How would we have a component to preserve the Maasai traditional way of life? And how would we have a mechanism that can sustain? So I came up with most of, what my brother said here, I came up with a camp. The camp is fully owned, managed, designed, run by the locals. So that we own the narrative. We use a continuity of our forefathers now infusing that indigenous knowledge with education. So we are able to understand what we are doing at the level that we are. the level that we are young people, we are into technology, we are into preserving our culture and into preserving and a conservation of our wildlife.
Okay.
Therefore, our model is we have a camp here that the tourists, the donors, everyone come. The resources we get there is channeled back to the non-profit, to the schools, take kids to school, build, support government. We've built police posts for government, schools, renovation schools, taking kids to school. So therefore, I wanted a model that we own. It is our own narrative. Because the moment we appreciate, we are not being asked to. It is where you feel it hurts in your shoe, that you are always able to adjust.
Okay.
So this is something that is relatable, that you know this is a son of so-and-so. So we seek to be inspiration, to inspire young people, to inspire the same community, that there's possibility.
Right.
That this can happen.
Okay. Yeah. Before we come back to you, allow us to try and loop in Tom. Tom is there?
Yep.
All right. Thank you once again. We are here talking about incorporation, of course, or the coming in of foreign policies, foreign ways and styles and operation of doing things, but also acknowledging that there's some element of, indigenous knowledge that is equally very important towards, helping us curb this concern that we are talking about, that is the human-wildlife conflict. Do you suppose then that, all this foreign stuff is sometimes too much, such that then it breeds more conflict as opposed to what it is that it's supposed to solve?
I think that's an excellent question. What we need to understand, and I'll highlight that, is that conservation is about bringing people together. We all breathe the same air, drink the same water, eat the same food, and at the end of the day, conservation can break barriers, whether it's about economic grouping or ethnicity or religion or whatever it might be, and it brings it all together. We all have to realize we have a purpose across the world, and I think that's what is then important again, is to recognize that heritage, tradition, local knowledge should lead in the conservation in the local context and should be supported by whatever financial mechanism might come in, or whether you've got tourists from overseas. And we have to remember that we have one of the most unique countries in the world. Our USP is our heritage, our people, our wildlife. And people from all over the world come here to see that. And then we need to enhance that. We need to make sure that the people, and conservation ultimately is about people, need to benefit from that revenue that's generated. And we try and do that at Lloyd Suburban Conservancy by engaging in education programs. We, together with our partner, the Pankaj Foundation, provide school meals for 2,500 children in schools around the Lloyd Suburban Conservancy every day. We've constructed a school, which was the dream of the Honourable MP for Laikipia North, Sarah Lecoreri. It's already got 400 boarders in that school. We provide meals, we provide scholarships, we provide uniform, etc. for that school. So we try and get it out there, and we talk about conservation for peace and education, and make this very strong line between these things, and not to be paternalistic about it. I think it's really important that when you have a conservancy or a protected area like Loisaba, you run properly delivered social questionnaire or something like a SAPA, social assessment around a protected area, which gives you the rationale for people that live around that protected area and what is important to them. And we see results coming out of that can be surprising, or maybe they're just what we believe in as well. And then you come together and work it out and make sure that you're driving in one direction and make it a teamwork. So I think that's what it's about, is respect, respect for local culture, respect for local communities, and to make sure that the benefits are very directly communicated and deeply understood. So be it scholarships, you make sure that the kids that get those scholarships understand that those scholarships are a result of wildlife conservation, apart from other things. So that then breeds another generation of people who get involved. And I'd like to highlight something else that Shuja said about personal responsibility. We all have to understand that we have a personal responsibility to deliver conservation in our own context. And I think that's really important. We're not going to change things if we just think that we're going to have a foreign organization or even a local one parachute in and change everything for everything. That's not going to work. We're going to have to take personal responsibility. And this is something that I see more and more in local communities and people that I've lived with for over 30 years that is coming out now. And I think that's going to be the strength of conservation and how we deal with human-wildlife conflict going forward.
Right.
And to make sure that you come in with things that actually work, like be it a predator-proof boma. So if you're a pastoralist and you get support to deliver a predator-proof boma, you stop losing livestock to leopard. You know, you can imagine if you have a herd of 100 sheep and goats and one night 30 get eaten by a leopard, you're not going to be very happy about wildlife conservation. So you have to mitigate that and make people understand that it's their personal responsibility to also protect their livestock, etc. So these are some of it's complex, but at the end of the day, there's a pretty simple line to draw around the benefit from conservation.
All right, and without having to repeat what it is that you have said, the two gentlemen are concerned about the element of education. What would you say is the significance of education and awareness raising efforts, of course, in building empathy towards this wildlife? And what are some of the notable challenges that you have yourself encountered in terms of making sure that we are able to mitigate and as well as, manage human-wildlife conflict?
I think, making sure, and I think this is something that we need to strive for as a country, that with the curriculum of our formal education is conservation. And I think we can do it as outsiders that come in and make sure that there are education trips to conservancies and bring school kids in to see wildlife, to understand wildlife, to have lectures around it. But at the end of the day, we're going to really move the dial if we make sure that conservation becomes a central part of curriculum, not just wildlife clubs and things like that. Yeah. And I think, getting on board early with children so that they understand natural systems and natural planet beyond what they may or may not have heard, and how all things work is critically important to make a change in the long term.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, thank you. We'll come back to you shortly, but then back here, and you speak of boundaries, perhaps enlighten us some more when you're talking about setting up schools, setting up hospitals, and setting up, beautiful homes and entities that would rather, trigger or perhaps bring some vibrance, economic vibrance in these particular areas. How can we do that without setting up, the notable boundaries that we speak of? And even as you highlight that, just what, again, is the impact of on the socio-economic aspect, the impact of human-wildlife conflict on these local communities?
I will talk based on practice on what we're doing. So we've got the knowledge we've learned, and we've got the traditional knowledge. And what works for us in Lingwezi or Laikipia is we put them together and come up with a way of how to go about it. So think of a school, what we are doing, or we believe if you want to have livestock, which is our life, you have to grow grass. And growing grass doesn't mean go buy seeds and put them in the ground. We are doing that now because we've overgrazed in some parts of the land. But before you do that, you must come up with what we call settlement areas. Okay, so I said earlier that in Lingwezi we've set aside about 75% of our land. The rest, which is 25, is where we've done the settlement area. That is where you can live, and that's where we put clinics and schools. So it's not really about acquiring more land. Yes, we're doing that, but how do you work with what you have? And to be able to do that, you don't allow people. And it's not the leadership saying, it's the community itself. Sit around the tree on a meeting and agree, this is going to be our settlement area, and that is where we're putting our infrastructure. Okay, so that by doing that, then it comes in the aspect of connecting technology into what we're doing today. And for many years, I think conservation has been left to the elderly, and to be precise, in my culture, to the men. It's the time that women are brought in and the youth are coming in. And where do we put the youth? They've got their degrees in several areas, but that is, now we have things like Earth Ranger, where you can mount these gadgets and you can be able to tell which is the corridor of wildlife and where can you do all these put together. This is technology and culture put together. Then it gives you the way on where to put your infrastructure and where not to.
Just how much is the government involved in all these processes? Because it sounds like it's a community affair and conservancies and perhaps, you know, donors and all that. And maybe there's little of what the government is to do or is doing.
I think is how the government is structured in this context. And before I go to that point, is about what is this that we can do? What next? What do we expect? Today's World Wildlife Day.
Yeah.
It takes another 365 days for us to come back to a time like this.
Yeah.
It is about people are acting based on profit, on things like that. On the community involvement, you find, like for instance in the Mara, there are conservancies, there are government, but we have to cultivate a culture, just the way the president came up with the 15 billion trees.
Yeah.
How would we cultivate and own as a country? I like an approach where Dr. Paula Kahumbo, who is a stout supporter of wildlife in this country, is advocating for all the school-going kids to be able to go to the parks for free. Because you never know how many people you are converting or changing into people who will take care of this wildlife tomorrow or these species tomorrow, which we urge the government to be able to look into that. I think I remember there was a time, long time ago, where all school-going children were able to get to board the buses for free. Most time, I guess. We look, how would we be able to cultivate this? How would we get incentive for people to be able to do this, not rather because they get benefit, but because it is important for the balance of this country, for the balance of everything. In the context of what the government is doing, we have two critical components that are stuck together, but one is overshadowing the other. That is tourism and wildlife. In my essence, either we should separate or we should give equal budget and equal attention to both.
Okay.
You find tourism, there is Expo in Berlin, there is a roadshow in the US, there is something else, there is expos here, but we don't have almost the same matching in terms of wildlife. When you look at KWS, and I think Tom is a board chair there, a board member, you find most of the time is underfunded. We need as well. This is a foundation for tourism. There's no tourism if we don't have wildlife, if we don't have the community that is supporting that wildlife. So we have to look at foundation, not just how beautiful, aesthetic the house will be, but also the foundation that holds that. The moment we don't have wildlife, the moment we finish the conflict, the gap of conflict creates as well poaching. All these bad things will rob what the tourists come and see. So the moment we slash or we ignore the conservation efforts, or government not putting enough measures into it, we lose the entire tourism component.
Right.
But I like the fact that conservancies in this country, leadership in this country, we participating as young people, and we look forward to be able to recruit as many people as possible so that we can have a better future tomorrow.
Do you suppose there's some element of genuineness in this? Because if you've heard Shuja, he's so much so highlighting this concern on, you know, it being a money-minting affair, that perhaps it's a lucrative business for very many people, and therefore beyond preserving and beyond making sure that our animals are safe and even the environment itself is, we probably have not been so keen in terms of being genuine in preserving them.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with him. But I must say, as a country, we've done really well.
Okay.
The fact that our government has allowed communities to indulge into the world of conservation and private conservancies. Thinking when I was little, it was Kenya Wildlife. It was not even Kenya Wildlife Service. They had an anti-poaching.
Okay.
It was in charge of wildlife. I think this country allowing us to be able to benefit out of wildlife conservation and practice it is a big leap that other countries should follow and do the same.
Right.
Having said that, I have a problem with, I don't want to go back to what he said, but I have a problem with the devolved functions in this country. The county I come from is very cosmopolitan. I think in Narok it's easy because pretty much a big percent are Maasais and they've been practicing this. A county that I come from, every new county government comes and put in laws that really affects or do not support wildlife conservation. As I say, dealing with is a private, a community-owned and run lodge. But I find every government that comes in with new rules. And we are getting double taxed because people see, or every government or a lot of governments that come in see wildlife conservation and tourism as a Muzungu thing in Laikipia.
Right.
So for us, communities, we're getting hammered with taxes that we cannot be able to sustain what we're doing. And we're seeing almost nothing from the county government plowed back to those community conservancies. And this is where the mistake comes because we need to work on this, on what are the best mechanisms that we need to put in place. So if any new government comes in, they factor wildlife conservation and do not look at it as a Muzungu thing or a private person thing. It's a national treasure and we're working towards supporting the government rather than harvesting and need money, just think about money.
And I certainly hope that these are conversations that are being had at that level so that when there's a new government, then this is told to them so that we continue with what it is that was set. We see whether it works. At a point where we realize it's not working is when now we can shift to a different affair. Mr. Director, 30 minutes for the gentlemen, 30 seconds, so that at least they can give us their parting shots. We begin with Tom.
Up on what Kip says, I think it's critically important that policy around wildlife and legislation around wildlife and conservation has continuity from government to government, because if you think about you have to protect the long term and you have to look at the future. And if you're going from 5-year cycles and changing policy or changing things, then it's extremely difficult for the conservation to thrive and be planned. And that will impact human-wildlife conflict and all sorts of other things. So I think that we have a big challenge on our hands, but I think as Kenyans are up to the task, a lot of minds are engaged in improve situation, conflict, and to better plans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom Sylvester, CEO, Loisaba Conservancy, for the great insights. The conversation continues. And to the gentleman here, when was the last time you saw a lion eye to eye? Today?
Yes.
Like where? 30 seconds.
I take this opportunity to say a big thank you to everyone who is supporting today's theme. And I think we need to know and to salute the rangers and the communities who are facing a lot of challenges. We've got rangers who've lost their lives protecting this treasure. They need recognition, and we all need to know that they're doing a very, very good job for our better tomorrow. And do not forget, we need to bring the youth into the world of conservation for a better tomorrow for all of us.
Beautiful. We appreciate the rangers. We appreciate all of you who are committed to this. As we sum it up in 30 seconds.
Thank you so much.
And when was the last time you saw a lion? All right.
Pretty much. We live with this, and I will say thank you to you for giving us this opportunity to tell the world and to share the insight of what we are doing. My last word is thank you to the government, county government of Narok. They're really doing a good job in looping everyone on board and making sure those consistent laws that protects the wildlife. To the people of Kenya, let's rally behind this treasure. It's not everywhere you find. We are privileged as a country, and we should take that not for granted. And team up and have all this from all the technological, TikTok, everything, to be able to share this critical component that we have as a country.
True, and I think that's a polite way of saying that this conversation does not end here. This conversation should not be an annual conversation. This conversation should be a daily conversation.
Absolutely.
We call upon you to speak to it. Please heed to our call.
We will be there.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Last speaker is Shujaa Prince Harrison Taga, who's a founder, Friends of Masai Mara and Mara Napa Camp and Conservation Center, as well as Keep Olipolo's chairperson, like Keep Your Conservancies. That is association. Asanteni sana for the great insights, and as well, we appreciate everybody who's committed towards this noble cause of conserving our environment, conserving our wildlife. We close at this very point. Thank you so much for the great insights, as well as for the immense feedback. We look forward to see you again on Sunday on To The Point. My name is Linda Alela. Do have yourself a lovely, lovely week ahead and a night. Bye-bye. Thank you, Jen.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.